مستعد اواجه نفسي واجه. يا اقفل الشباك عشان عايز افيق. رافع رجلي في وش كل حقود. واو. مفيش شبهي في بلدك، قارن ورقي بورقك. بلدك المفضلة بنما دنيا ومليش عزيز. مرقة الماريو جيت اشعلل، جيت اكسرك وجيت اكعبل. قالولي ايه الغرض ليه مستعجل، ساحب الكاش حماس دفعت البي ام سبورت. انا رياضي مان لابس الشورت، انا موسيقى انا اللي عازف الكورد. حلقتلها عشان انا اللورد فيري امبورتنت. اتنين نوم عايز يوم ضيف، تيجي نيو جيز على طول تاخد روم كيز والتشيز. خدني صورة باخد تور فيه لما تعوز فيه تخلي بالك انا اقوم بيك. بطل عالم داخل مولا اجيب كاب حصل حالة بيجيب سيرتي كتير واخد بالك انا مش مشغول بيه واخد بالك. واول ما تسقف انا رقص، كل ما تعقد انا بسط. هتروح تجيب اجلي باشا قصط. كل ما تعقد انا بسط. في اوبشن ان انا اتكلم في الحته دي. اتكلم. عملتها جامده. ايه دوري مي فا سولا سي دو، ده قبل ديا ودي قبل دول. ذكاء مالو حدود يا مان افلاطون. انت رحت في الرجلين بنطلون. على كيفك خد هت يا باشا على عينك. اي ماكارينا صحابي كازابلانكا صحابك كذا هيتا. كابتن طلب صغير ابلع ريقك خد بق ميه. بطلت هايبر يا اسطى شكلك كده مش مسيطر. حبيبي على بالي كتير جميل بني غامق صافي زي الحرير. البنت افتكرتني في كايروكي اصل تصرفاتي زي الامير. مش عايزة اتمنظر لا بس ده بصراحة مش منظر. باشا يخشى ان انا اجيبه يتصنفر، باشا يتلم انا اشيله يتكمر. واول ما تسقف انا رقصها، كل ما تعقد انا بسط. هتروح تجيب اجلي باشا قصط. كل ما تعقد انا بسط. كسر الوزة بيبسي حاجز الليسته باسمي. مارومان لسه بتجري مجالك مستحلف لي. راكن التسلا في جهتي حلوة جهتي المعادي. It's just المعادي it's just جهتي فاهم. ودي يس في 22 27 بومين 29.
على عهدي قناديني على أرض تلاقيني. أنا نهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني.
أنا فلسطيني يا ابن الأحبة نحب فيك ناكلك لحمة. مفيش كلام دي مرجحنا هنا الدماغ بتسوحنا. على بلدنا نبرطع فيها نعلي صوت والأرض نبنيها. نحط فيك لو شفنا فيها شباب أمريكا الكل بريها. سقطنا فيكو بس الشحبة الأرض أرض اسمع سحبة. قلوبكم مرضى قلوب بحدة. احنا لو يوم تلمحنا ومصيرها تنضف عنية ونعبها لكم غرية. نسمع صراخ أمريكانية من الأراضي المصرية. مش زيك ناخد المرجلة اسم احنا تربنا بنهين في الخصم. اللعب كتير وكتير الاسم احنا فلسطين بالروح والجسم. العين والشمس تطفي النار الله بيحمينا الليل ونهار. ما نخاف من عليكم غدار لو كانوا تعبين نعزف مزمار. عامل معاكي كلاشي قافل عليكم بكل ماشي. لست ميري انا وباشا اموت ومرفعش قماشي. بفك روحي المربوطة يا خصمي يا ابن المظبوطة. كل حتة دي محطوطة دي زي بلدك شر. خدنا من خيرها نصيب مخافش لو موت في ايدكم. دعمكم من يصبح سكة انه ما ينسيت سكة. اخدنا من خيرها نصيب مخافش لو موت في ايدكم. دعمكم من يصبح سكة انه ما ينسيت سكة. فلسطيني يا ابن الأحبة نهب فيك ناكلك لحمة. مفيش كلام بيمرجحنا هنا الدماغ بتسوحنا. على بلدنا نبرطع فيها نعلي صوت والأرض نبنيها. نحط فيك لو شفنا فيها شباب أمريكا الكل بريها. عامل معاكي كلاشي قافل عليكم بكل ماشي. لست ميري أنا وباشا أموت ومرفعش قماشي. بفك روحي المربوطة يا خصمي يا ابن المظبوطة. كل حتة دي محطوطة زي بلدك شر. threatening about divesting and want a piece. The problem isn't the protest, it's what they're protesting. It goes against what our country is funding. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. Block the barricade until Palestine is free. When I was 7, I learned a lesson from Cuban Eazy-E. What was it again? Oh yeah, fuck the police. Actors and badges protecting property in a system that was designed by white supremacy. But the people are in the streets. You can pay off Meta, you can't pay off me. Politicians who serve by any means. APAC, Kufi, and all the companies. You see me so fear around the land of the free. But this generation here is about to cut the strings. You can ban TikTok, take us out the algorithm, but it's too late. We've seen the truth, we bear witness. Seen the rubble, the buildings, the mothers and the children, and all the men that you murdered. And then we see how you spin it. Who gets the right to defend and who gets the right of resistance? It's always been about dollars and the color of your pigment. White supremacy is finally all glass, screaming free Palestine to their home at last. We see the lies and claiming it's anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist. I seen Jewish brothers and sisters out there and riding in solidarity and screaming free Palestine. With them organizing and learning and finally cutting ties with the state that's gotta rely on apartheid system to uphold and occupying violent history been repeating for the last 75. The never ended, the colonizer lied. If students' intents posted on the lawn, occupying the quad is really against the law. No reason to call in the police and their squad. Where does genocide land in your definition, huh? Destroying every college in Gaza and every mosque, pushing everyone into Rafeef and dropping bombs. The blood is on your hands, bite it, we can see it all. And fuck no, I'm not voting for you in the fall. Undecided, you can't twist the truth. The people out here united, never be defeated when freedom's on the horizon. Yet the music industry's quiet, complicit in their platform of silence. What happened to the artist? What you gotta say? If I was on a label, you could drop me today. I'd be fine with it, cause the heart fed my page. I want a ceasefire, fuck a response from Drake. What you willing to risk? What you willing to give? What if you were in Gaza? What if those were your kids? If the West was pretending that you didn't exist, you want the world to stand up, and the students finally did. Let's get it.
Not every Zionist is Jewish, and not every Jew is a Zionist.
This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. It's about time we globalize the Intifada. Listen close, I've got 6 words for Obama. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza. Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. It's about time we globalize the Intifada. Listen close, I've got 6 words for Obama. Long live Palestine, long live Gaza.
The government supports the people of the UK didn't. Zionism's not compatible with Judaism. The hijacked faith, the state is misrepresenting Israel equals displacement and ethnic cleansing. I know I'm on a list for being more verbal. Curse every Zionist since Theodore Herzl. Balfour was not a wise man. Shame on Rothschild. Between them the monster they created has gone wild.
العدو انحصر من اخون غدر. انتوا بتشعروش بالبطولة لو حفتكم بحجر. الانسحاب من العراق مثل جراد فاجر خراب غاب فيش عقاب. كم من كتم كم من هدم. حريتي بتبدا لما اخذها يدفع الثمن. سيد القاضي انظر اليه افتح دينيه. كم من دليل يصرخ عليه اترك المطرق اعطيني حرياتي واربط ايديه.
Tears to laughter, our children don't fear disaster. Living near the master, clear the fastest, hear the casket. We rap when we die from bombastic time. Looms after hot summer days in the thunder blaze. They murk your dreams like Theodore Herzl screams. In the UN in 48, third intifada. For mothers, daughters, sons martyred and empty fathers like
عودة وبس مجتمع كامل بالحدث رصاص ضرب وضرب المطر كبس وكبس النفس لكن قطع حتى الطفل انرفس 6 حدود ام حديد شيل الطير من القفص روح طير طير يا عمي روح انت دمي حياتي وقلبي معك هيدا ذنبي ناطر بس المهدي وعيسى ان ياتي والامل الوحيد اللي صفى هو ربي.
ما اینکه تو تلویزیون ها همش میشینن دروغ میگن. داشتم اخبار میدیدم که چطورا جورا رو بچه ها و عشقای مادر ها رو زمین میریزن. بچه ها شیرینن نشونش رو بچه ای که تازه یاد گرفته را بره و دستشو میگیرن. باری کرد بعد تیری زد. چند وقت پیش صحنه های شبیه اینو تو چند قدمی میدیدم. دارم چی میگم
those innocent little babies. I studied the Torah and learned by their own admission Israel's actions are not kosher in their own religion.
بطلع حوالي فيش حياة أخدوا أرضي من تحت جاي أعطوني معاناة كنا نحمل طورية نترزى من الله خلونا نحمل بندقية نتوكل على الله مجزرة مذبحة الكل شافها على الشاشات مش اليوم مش ضفة مش غزت معا بالصفحات التاريخ شوف المسيح شوف أكتر من 60 عام دق الأجساد في فلسطين.
The devil's got an unholy plan for the holy land. So I hold my Quran, cut your power in the other hand. Damn. No oasis, just bloodstained sand. Settlements setting up to eliminate child, woman, and man. There's no such thing as the Middle East, brother, they deceiving you. No matter where you stand, there's always something to the east of you. So whether it's the Mossad or the FBI policing you, it's all one struggle until the final breath is leaving you.
لازم نعرف كيف نهدد الشعب العربي وحدتنا عمود الثغري. لازم نتعلم كيف نفكر لازم نتعلم كيف نودي رسالة بدون ما نسكر ابواب الايمان يا سيدي. ما كنتش عرفت خيري لو ما جربت غيري. تاخد كلامي تجربي مش الهاني. لازم نقطع راس الوحش عشان يضيع طريقه واخرته تنكشف.
Sing it with me now. Free, free Palestine. 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 Free, free Palestine.
تركنا المدينة الغربة الحزينة سلم لي عريحة وسلم عالديرة يا طير الطير الأرض الكريمة مخدوش اللي فينا سلم لي عريحة وسلم عالديرة يا طير الطير. بين النهر والجبال بلاقي انتمائي بين الشط والرمال بداية حياتي أحلق يا وطن فرحة ومآسي أحلق وطن الغالي فلسطين حبيبتنا.
Big dreams, heavy nights, praying that my family can stay alive. Imagine trying to fly with no wings, but I promise you the cage birds sing in the wintertime. Heavy nights, big dreams, praying that we make it to 16. And even though I travel the world, مش ملاقي زي فلسطين.
فات الوقت عمري راحوا سنين ومناسي هدي عوامر الخطر مجروح. فات الوقت عمري راحوا سنين ومناسي هدي عوامر الخطر مجروح.
Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea. Welcome to Socialism. My name is Sean Larson. I'm a political education coordinator at Haymarket Books, and I'm on the conference organizing team. On behalf of Haymarket, we want to thank you all for being here and spending the weekend here with us. Last year, this time, none of us imagined we would be almost a year into a genocide in Gaza when we gathered here today. We come together now with grief heavy on our hearts, but we also come together to recommit to the struggle for a free Palestine and a liberated world. The Socialism Conference aims to provide a space to grow as a multifaceted movement by learning from each other, strengthening our organizations, and re-energizing our efforts to build a different society. Political education is only one of many necessary parts that build social movements, but there is no doubt that it is vital for sustaining struggles for a better future. The Socialism Conference is a culmination of a collaborative effort of many people and organizations throughout the year. We in particular want to thank our comrade Sinan Shakdeh for supporting the conference and for making a gift of this beautiful Palestinian flag that just arrived today from Palestine. Wow. Over 90 organizations from a broad cross-section of the left came together to make this gathering possible. As you join discussions and debates this weekend, we ask that everyone help us to foster a welcoming and respectful culture where each of us knows that we have each other's backs. The world we are fighting for will take all of us, and we want this space to reflect that. There are a few steps we have taken toward that end that I want to highlight. If you need ASL or Spanish interpretation, we have interpreters here. Please see us at the registration table. As you've noticed, we once again have a mask mandate. We wanted to take a moment at the start of the conference to explain this. We know that in our society, we have each been left to make our own individual choices and decisions about how to navigate this pandemic. At a time when many of us are rarely, if ever, required to wear a mask, our policies may cause surprise or even provoke questions from some attendees. Nonetheless, COVID remains pervasive. Conference attendees travel to Chicago from all over the world, and our priorities remain the same as they were the last 2 years. We aim to make the Socialism Conference accessible to anyone looking to share organizing lessons, learn from radical history, and build community, and to the maximum extent possible to ensure that no one leaves the conference having contracted COVID or any other illness and suffer the resulting health and economic consequences. Even and especially if you are not someone who typically opts to wear a mask, we thank you for respecting our policy and helping us to enact a compassionate and collective approach to holding a large-scale gathering during an ongoing health crisis. Finally, as part of our community safety approach to the conference, badge checkers are assigned to each conference session. We rely on responsible comrades to fill the role and appreciate their help with making the conference a safe and successful event. If you are asked for your badge while at the door, it may be a bit jarring, and we totally understand that. But please know that our badge checkers are integrated into our larger community safety plans, which is necessary for holding a large left-wing conference without relying on carceral means. Once again, thank you all for making the journey here, whether from elsewhere in Chicago or from across the world. We hope that you make this part of your annual plans and join us next year for Socialism 2025, which will be held from July 3rd through the 6th. With that, I want to introduce Anthony Tamez from the Chi Nations Youth Council for our land acknowledgement.
من قدام ولا من ورا مش عارفة.
بدك تغطي ايديك.
I guess ما رح يزبط صح.
Bujuani Iskarenini Indigenous Kaj Iskagunin Junjaba Meknadunam. Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Temez. I'm Key First Nations, Lakota and Black, and I am a member of the Chi Nations Youth Council, Native American Youth Council here in the city of Chicago. With a mission to create safe space for Native youth through arts, activism, and education. A little bit about myself too. I'm also an elected official for the city of Chicago, so I oversee our police department when it comes to all aspects of accountability and transparency, which makes me the only sitting Native American elected official in the state of Illinois, and the youngest Native American elected official in the entire nation.
Woo!
And like they said, Chi Nations will be delivering a land acknowledgement. This is an indigenous protocol performed on indigenous lands across the globe. And it is an absolute honor to welcome you all to my beautiful city, to my ancestral homelands, a city that I was elected to represent, and a city that I was born and raised in. So I hope you all have a fun and a safe time here learning. Illinois sits upon the ancestral homeland to the Anishinaabe, Nisui, Niskotuin, or Council of Three Fires, Ojibwe, Odawa, and the Potawatomi, along with dozens of tribes who have cultivated and molded the land to sustainably suit their needs since time immemorial. An acknowledgement of the land is an indigenous protocol performed on indigenous lands across the globe. Illinois was and is a site of trade, travel, and healing for indigenous peoples since time immemorial. And it's acknowledged and given gratitude the remarkable resilience of the indigenous peoples and American Indian community that continue to practice their tribal and intertribal cultures while flourishing in our metropolis and continue to enhance our great city's beauty. And with that, I think that we, Chi Nations, would also like to acknowledge, land acknowledgements must continue to go further than they already do, and make sure that they aren't performative, So we like to tell people that treaties go both ways. Native people, indigenous people, American Indians have upheld their part of the treaties. Now it is upon you all to uphold your current government's treaty to Native people, to uphold our sovereignty, and to uphold our inherent right to live as indigenous people on this land. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Now I'd like to bring up our moderator for the evening, Sumaya Awad.
Woo!
Sumaya Awad is a Palestinian writer and socialist organizer.
That's right.
She is also the director of strategy of the Adala Justice Project and co-editor of Palestine, a Socialist Introduction.
Thank you. So you are all here to hear from these panelists. So I'm just doing a very brief introduction to this panel. As people have already said, we're here after nearly a year of this total evisceration, destruction, genocide that is unfolding in Gaza by the Israeli state. And as we sit here tonight and all weekend, we really hear the hollow echoes of never again, right? That have lost all meaning. As Palestinians in Gaza are being murdered, men, women, and children, 200,000, likely the number is higher, and of course millions and millions more impacted for generations to come.
Shame.
And our government has the power to stop this, and they aren't. And that is another reason that we're here today, and that we have this panel, and that you are all here, and that you're here tomorrow and Sunday, and that you're leaving here with a goal of what you do next. We know that there has been a massive shift in the United States around Palestine. We have seen poll after poll show that the majority of Americans support an arms embargo. The majority of Americans don't want to support Israel, are critical of Israel. And yet we haven't seen that translate into the mass action we need. And that despite this massive shift, we grapple with, I certainly grapple with, the fact that this shift came at the expense of how many lives lost, how many people murdered, who paid the price for these people to shift. And it's not to say that this shift is not tremendous and incredible and good. It is all of those things, but we must also grapple with the fact that it is lives being lost on the daily, and that it is all by design, and that it all can be stopped in basically a moment. And I say all of this not because we need to pity Palestinians, quite the opposite, nor that we must grieve more. Grief is necessary, but that's not the answer. I say it all because as we're here tonight listening to these incredible, brilliant panelists, and as we go through the sessions tomorrow and Sunday and onward, we have to keep asking ourselves, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing with this knowledge? What am I doing with this education? How is it translating into action? How is it translating into action that does not preach to the choir, but preaches to those who are not yet where we need them to be? And you have to have an answer to that question. So keep asking yourself, because a year from now, in July apparently, when you're back here, you have to have an answer. Don't find yourself just asking again the same question. Be ready to answer, what have I done in the last year? So ask yourself that question. And before I turn to our first speaker and introduce them, I want to read a brief quote from Hiba Abu Nada, who's a Palestinian writer and poet who was killed along with her family on October 20th in Gaza. And she wrote this a few days before she was killed. She was 32 years old. We are above, building a second city. Doctors without patience or blood, professors without overcrowding and yelling at students, new families without pain or sadness, journalists photographing paradise, and poets writing about eternal love. All of them from Gaza. All of them. In heaven, a new Gaza, unbesieged, is coming into being. And that's the Gaza we're fighting for. That's right. Not above in the heavens, but here. And that's why we're all here today. And with that, I'd like to turn to our first speaker, Abdel Takriti, who's an associate professor of history and Arab American Educational Foundation chair in Arab Studies at Rice University. He's also the co-author with Karma Nabulsi of the Palestinian Revolution Digital Humanities Resource, Learn Palestine, and the co-creator with Daniel Denver of the Dig Podcast's Thawra miniseries on modern Arab radicalism. Abdel Razzaq.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I was just talking with Linda, and we were saying that there is very little left to say after a full year almost of genocide, daily genocide, after years and years and years of incremental genocide preceding it in Gaza, after a century of colonialism, of a very violent kind of settler colonialism that has been ravaging Palestine. There are commonalities that are very important to emphasize to what's going on in Palestine today and what was happening here in this land and elsewhere in the colonized world before and after colonization. In fact, the land acknowledgement we heard today is something that we should be very attuned to. It's not just a symbolic gesture. It tells us a lot about what colonialism is, what it seeks to achieve, and obviously what it does to the indigenous peoples that it affects. The colonialists were aware of that in Palestine. They could not have been not aware of that because Palestine was the latest example of European settler colonialism. That was the last example, in fact, of European settler colonialism of the classic kind. The mentor to the Likudists, the person who Netanyahu's father had served as personal secretary to, was a man called Vladimir Jabotinsky. He came from modern-day Ukraine. He was very clear about the fact that what was taking place is a colonization project and that it was going to produce the classic results of a colonization project, including native resistance. He wrote a pamphlet 100 years ago called The Iron Wall. And that pamphlet is very important for understanding what's happening now and the strategies of the genociders, as well as the powers backing them here in the United States. He told his Zionist audience in 1923, and I'm quoting him here, "My readers have a general idea of the history of colonization in other countries. I suggest that they consider all the precedents with which they are acquainted and see whether there is one solitary instance of any colonization being carried out with the consent of the native population. There is no such precedent. The native population, civilized or uncivilized," I'm using his language here obviously, "have always stubbornly resisted the colonists, irrespective of whether they were civilized or savage. And it made no difference whatever whether the colonists behaved decently or not." And here he mentions the colonization of the Americas. He talks about Cortez and Pizarro and so on and so forth, until he comes back to Palestine. And he insists on the final conclusion, which he says in very clear terms. He tells his Zionist audience that there is no possibility of an agreement, a voluntary agreement, to be made with the Palestinian population. The Palestinian Arabs, as far as he was concerned, have to be forced into submission to the Zionist program. And that for him, that for him means that there's a need to construct what he called an iron wall. And that's not just the literal wall that we see now in Palestine, this horrendous structure that divides entire towns and villages and ruins people's lives. It's also a metaphorical wall, of course. A wall against which Palestinians are expected to fail in their resistance. They're expected to bang their heads against it until they give up. And I'm quoting Jabotinsky again. He says, "We cannot offer any adequate compensation to the Palestinian Arabs in return for Palestine. And therefore there is no likelihood of any voluntary agreement being reached, so that all those who regard such an agreement as a condition sine qua non for Zionism may as well say none and withdraw from Zionism. Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population." You know, we have a lot of pieces now denying that Zionism is settler colonialism. We have these terrible publications like The Atlantic, a bankrupt magazine that's not worth toilet paper, denying settler colonialism. But the settler colonists were very, very clear about what Zionism is. It is a colonization project. And now this genocide is the latest phase of that colonization project. 70 years. It took 70 years after the authoring of this document for the native population to come and say, okay, we'll accept some aspect of this Zionist program. It came out of despair. Our people in 1993 were in a very difficult geopolitical position. They were isolated. As a result of American intervention in this region, America took out all the states surrounding Palestine, made sure that they separated them from the Palestinian people, invaded and conquered the states that did not wish to go along with the program, and isolated our people and created an atmosphere of fear that led the leadership to sign a terrible agreement called Oslo. Al-Aqsa flood happened on the 30th anniversary of that agreement. In that agreement, the leadership of the native population agreed essentially to relinquish 78% of our land, our precious land, the land that our ancestors had lived in for millennia, the land in which we had exercised our sovereignty for centuries. And yet, Jabotinsky's descendants and followers didn't even accept that. They want to go further. It's not enough for them. Because Zionism, like other forms of settler colonialism, is hungry. It wants more and more. It has a voracious appetite. It wants to eat up people, land, resources. It wants to dominate. Its logic is constant expansion. It got the most incredible offer ever given by an indigenous people to accept their colonial power, and yet it said no. Oslo was supposed to result in a Palestinian state over parts of the remaining 22%. They didn't even want to do that. And then our people had to go through another phase of struggle. They had unleashed multiple revolutions before. My work happens to be on these revolutions. But now they had to carry out new tactics, find new ways of dealing with this impasse. They tried boycott. They tried nonviolent resistance. They tried non-cooperation. They exemplified courage during the first Intifada and the years after. They pursued every strategy, tactic possible on the face of this earth. And I say this because there's a lot of people that lecture Palestinians on strategies and tactics, including in the left. So the first thing that needs to be emphasized in this room is, you know what? Palestinians have been there and done that a million times. Every tactic, every strategy. You have nothing to teach us, not because you're not smart, not because you don't have experiences, but because we've been in struggle for 100 years and we've been in contact with every third worldist movement out there throughout that period. We were in contact with the great Gandhi in 1924 when he hosted a Palestinian delegation. We were in contact with every great leader. We hosted Malcolm X. We hosted Che Guevara in Gaza. We've hosted every major national liberation struggle. We are the people that have produced Hassan Kanafani and people you've never heard of like May Sayegh, and people you might have heard of like Layla Khalid. Each one did their own types of struggle. They've tried every form of struggle out there. The left has to stand with Palestine regardless of what tactics, what strategies are followed by the Palestinian people. A couple of other points and then I'm closing. The left also has to acknowledge its own history of complicity in this project. Until the launch of the Palestinian revolutionary phase post-1967, for the most part, the Western left had supported Zionism in one form or another. There were exceptions, but unfortunately, there was a lot of complicity. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to reverse that complicity. When I started my own organizing I'm sorry to say this, I'm going to date myself, about 25 years ago plus, okay? In those days, the left was still not there. In a conference like this, you would have had debates and people questioning. It took a lot of work, including on the part of people here in this distinguished panel, to create a difference and make a change. So now, we're saying this not to do blame, but to say that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, including outside the left. And this means that every socialist out there has to think of this as a long-term commitment. Because anti-colonialism does not work on the short run. It's a long-term commitment. Another point that needs to be emphasized relates to Palestinian leadership. I hear a lot of debates now about Hamas this, Hamas that, Fatah this, Fatah that. That is not the business of solidarity. And I say it seriously, not because there aren't debates to be had about leadership. We can have those debates, and we do. The reality is that you're in solidarity with a cause, with the people, regardless of what ideological banners it chooses to pursue its anti-colonial practice under. The reality is it is facing a structure of colonialism. It's a horrific structure, and trust me, in the same way that we've used every strategy and tactic out there, we've also used every ideology in this whole world. Every ideology. From Ottoman notable politics in the early 20th century to different forms of talking about interfaith stuff through the Muslim Christian associations of Palestine, to working with, under leftist banners and Marxism, Leninism, through using local forms of patriotism, pan-Arabism, third worldism, Maoism, the list goes on. And yes, now we have Islamic parties since the 1980s, and in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution and the Afghanistan war and everything that happened since then. But the one thing that has not changed is that we are an oppressed people fighting for freedom.
That's right.
So enough with the sophistry, including on the part of Palestinians that engage in this sophistry abroad. I'm sorry to say this. Let us stop this nonsense. There's a genocide going on. We stand with the people. We will expose the genocide. Our role in the United States is to mobilize, organize tirelessly until freedom is achieved for Palestine on the pathway for achieving freedom for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdel Razzaq. Our next speaker is Rabbi Brant Rosen, who serves as the Sadek Chicago a synagogue he helped found in 2015, a longtime Palestinian solidarity activist and organizer. Brant is the co-founder of the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council and the Jewish Fast for Gaza. He blogs regularly at the Jewish social justice blog, Shalom Rav, and is the author of the book Wrestling in the Daylight, A Rabbi's Path to Palestinian Solidarity. Brant is also a prolific poet and liturgist whose prayers and poems can be found on his blog, Yadid Nefesh. As you can tell, I did not read this before. And his chapbook, Songs After the Revolution, New Jewish. I'm not going to say the word again because I'm going to butcher it. Brant.
Thank you. In terms of all you need to know about me vis-a-vis my presence on this amazing panel is that I'm part of the movement for Palestine solidarity and Palestinian liberation. My congregation, Tzedek Chicago, which is almost 10 years old now, is founded on very clear core values of justice and solidarity and anti-Zionism. We are an avowedly anti-Zionist congregation. I'm also, as was mentioned, the co-founder of the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council, along with Rabbi Alyssa Wise, who's right here in the third row. So I'm here as a rabbi of a local anti-Zionist congregation. I'm here as a member of Jewish Voice for Peace and part of this movement. But I think my remarks aren't meant to be officially representing any of these groups, but rather I just feel very, very honored to be asked to be part of this conversation this evening. And would like to offer a few thoughts as a Jewish person vis-a-vis Jewish positionality in this movement. I'm very well aware that I am a non-Palestinian on this panel, and I see my place in this movement really as being accountable to Palestinians, but I don't see the Jewish participation in this movement, I don't view it through an allyship framework. I think we're part of a coalition. We're part of a growing movement, each of whom has a part to play, but ultimately accountable to the Palestinians who lead this movement. So, first of all, for those of you who have traveled here to be here, welcome to Chicago. It's great to have you. I want to say to the organizers of Socialism, the Socialism Conference, thank you. I thank you always, but I have to say after the week of the DNC last week, the sacrilege that was the DNC in this city, socialism is coming right at the right time to be able to come together and offer a different vision of what could be is just truly a gift. And I said it before, I'll say it one more time, I'm honored to be part of this. I'm glad Abdel mentioned, I want to pick up on one of the points that he made when he talked about Vladimir Jabotinsky, the Zionist ideologue from Eastern Europe and the author of The Iron Wall. Because Jabotinsky, who you heard about and you learned a little bit about, he's often positioned as part of many streams of Zionism, but in fact, what Jabotinsky was doing was he was saying the quiet part out loud. He was saying the things that Zionism is ultimately predicated on, but most Zionists were not willing or able or ready to say out loud, but he was. He was unabashed about ethnic cleansing. He was unabashed about settler colonialism. He saw the Palestinian population as a problem. And that is the fatal core at the center of Zionism. And when I use the term Zionism, I just want to define my terms. I define myself as an anti-Zionist. And when I say that, as a rabbi of an anti-Zionist congregation that went through a long process in deciding to add this to our core values. We were very, I think, one of the most impactful statements for us when we were deliberating was a statement, a very famous quote by Angela Davis, who said that in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, you have to be anti-racist. And so when I use the term Zionism, what I'm referring to, just to make no mistake, it is an ideology and a movement that seeks to create a Jewish majority nation state in historic Palestine. That is, I think, as good, I believe, a definition of Zionism as you will find. And it is, as Abdel said, a form of settler colonialism. It's also a form of ethnic nationalism. It seeks to create a state based on the identity of one particular group of people. And if you are not part of that group, then you are a problem, ipso facto, just by definition. A movement that is seeking to create a Jewish majority nation state will look to those who are not part of that group as a problem to be dealt with. And that was the case before 1948, it was the case during the Nakba in 1948, and it has been the case ever since. And that is the essential injustice at the heart of this, this ideology and this movement. And you know, it is ongoing, and it is not enough, I believe, we believe, to simply say we're not Zionists. That's not us. We don't adhere to that. If you see something that's inherently unjust, right, inherently immoral, then you must commit to dismantling it and transforming it into something else. So, Zionism has, in its origins, was a minority position in the Jewish community. It was one of many different movements and ideologies of Jewish modernity, but it has become the sine qua non, the center of Jewish identity since then. And it's become conflated with Judaism since then. But one of the things I think that we've been seeing since October 7th, actually we've been seeing it prior to October 7th, but accelerating in a very, very dramatic way, is the growth of Jews who are stepping forward as anti-Zionist Jews, who are openly being in solidarity with Palestinians and joining this movement. And it was unmistakable. You could not miss the presence of Jews at demonstrations, at protests, at rallies. Jewish Voice for Peace went through a dramatic increase in membership during that time. There is an organization, or an initiative, I guess we would say, Rabbis for Ceasefire, that now has over 350 rabbis. This is something new. This is something very, very significant. And I think the fissures that have been building in the Jewish community over this issue have now widened, I believe, into an abyss. It is blown wide open. The Jewish community will never be the same ever again. And I don't want to belabor this point. I think it's for a different panel to talk about the transformation of the Jewish community. That's not what we're here to talk about necessarily. But I think it does bear noting, in as much as I think that the Jewish presence in this movement, the growing Jewish presence in this movement, has a unique role to play, and that is to intervene in the Zionist narrative that Israel stands for all Jews. Israel never stood for all Jews, but in order for Zionism to maintain its sense of legitimacy, it had to claim that. It had to claim that Judaism is Zionism and Zionism is Judaism. So, technically speaking, as part of this coalition, every group is important and every group has a role to play. But I think I've become increasingly aware of how important it is for Jews of conscience, anti-Zionist Jews, to build a new form of Jewish identity to combat this insidious conflation of Judaism and Zionism. And their numbers are increasing. My congregation has doubled in size since early October. I talked to them. I wasn't, that was not a brag, that was just a fact. I talk to them all the time. You know, when people join our congregation, we ask them to say a little bit about themselves, and there's always this, lately there's been this variation of, well, either I've never been able to be part of Jewish life because of Israel, or I just can't fucking take it anymore. You know, I just can't be part of this congregation anymore. I need to be in a Jewish space that shares my values. So I talk to them all the time. I get emails from them all the time. This is real. I don't believe it's simply anecdotal. I think there is a growing number of members of our community, largely young people, but not only, who just are not buying the Zionist narrative anymore. Either never have, are growing up in a world and saying, I can't accept this, or like myself and many others in this room I know, have gone through an evolution and are coming to grips with the deep moral problems of conflating Judaism and Zionism. I don't want to go into a long tutorial about the ways that Judaism and Zionism are separate. I'll only to say this, that Judaism is a centuries-old spiritual peoplehood. Zionism is a political ideology that emerged in the modern period in Europe. It's not uniquely Jewish. There are Christian Zionists, and most of them, as a matter of fact, are. There are more members of Christians United for Israel than there are Jews in the world, and that's just a fact. And it's also not true that being anti-Zionist is being anti-Semitic. And the best way to, I think, to intervene in this narrative is not simply to engage in didactic arguments about why this is not so, but it's to stand up loud and proud as a Jewish person, as an anti-Zionist Jewish person, and say, this is my Judaism and it's not that. So I want to share just one example of that, and that is from the student encampment movement from the spring. You know, my congregation was asked to, by Jewish students, specifically at DePaul University, actually, although here in Chicago they were, just about every university had an encampment, to come lead Shabbat services at the encampment, Sabbath services, which we did. And I have to say it was one of the most remarkable spiritual experiences of my life. The first time we did this, there was a Muslim call to worship before that. Everyone was together, gathered around the central spot. We led our service, and after that, there was a local indigenous dance group that put on an indigenous dance performance, and there were many other religious communities that were involved in this gathering. And I'd never seen anything quite like it. It was all completely organic. There were clearly many Jewish students there because they knew all the words to the prayers we were praying. And afterwards, many of them came up to me and thanked us for being there. And some of them said, this is the first time I've felt comfortable being in a Jewish space. And they considered this to be a Jewish space, but a very different kind of one. And really, these encampments were a living intervention in this narrative. And it was also, even more than that, it was an example of showing in real time what the world could be, what the world should be, the world that we're fighting for. And if you read in the paper what was going on in the Jewish encampments, you would think that Jewish students were just cowering in fear in front of this onslaught of anti-Semitism. And you know, I'm sure there are many, many people in this room who have similar experiences to mine who can attest that it was quite the opposite. And you know, now that school is back in session, and we're hearing that the encampment movement is, you know, very likely, we hope, to start to gear up again. I have a feeling it can't be stopped. But that's when I talk about intervening together in this narrative. It's not just about arguments and think pieces. It's about showing the world what the world should look like in real time. I have much more I'd like to say, but I'm coming to my deadline. So I'll just say this. You know, it was said by all of our speakers thus far that we are living in a time of genocide, and you know, we all know this. But for me, it's an important reminder. Whenever things start to feel a little muddy or confusing, I remind myself we are living in a time of genocide. And you know, just coming off of the DNC and all of just the disastrous tableau that we saw going on inside the United Center, to remind ourselves this is a time of genocide, and this is not a time for compromise. This is not a time for dithering. This is not a time for sitting on the fence. This is not a time for pleading. Please, may we have one speaker. Just let us have one speaker, and we will submit our statement in advance, and we promise we will play by your rules. We are living in a time of genocide, and years from now, it will be asked of us what we did in this moment. And we have to be able to stand up and say, we did everything we could. We said everything we could say. We organized everything we could organize. And yes, it has not been enough. And we will spend this weekend and beyond talking and strategizing about what we need to do in this moment. But we need to constantly remind ourselves this is a time of genocide and we must act accordingly. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you, Brant. Our next speaker is a poet. George Abraham is a Palestinian-American poet. They are the author of Birthright, the chapbooks, The Specimen's Apology, and El Yom. They are currently executive director of the award-winning journal Mizna, and their collaborations include co-editing a Palestinian poetry anthology with Noor Hindi, which will be published by Haymarket Books in 2025, and a performance art project titled Eve with Fargo Tbahi. George.
Hey, George.
Thanks to Haymarket for bringing me back to my former home of Chicago. I moved a month ago, so it's really great to be back so soon. I wanna start with just thinking about the title of this panel before I read my poem, thinking about failed solidarity for a bit, since this is a conversation between leftists. And I think a lot about how, from my position within the literary world, within cultural organizing, and as an editor of, Mizna is one of the only print magazines for Southwest Asian and North African people in this country, and it has been run by fearless Palestinian women for, now we're in our 25th year, honestly. So, and people who've been, publicly pro-BDS and BDS compliant in our material process down to the technology we use to print our journals, these kind of small details and lessons, I think, of seeing the inside of the academy versus the outside of this is what an actual community looks like, literary institutions versus literary community, right? has shown me a lot of lessons on the gap between these alleged pro-Palestine people and the people who are pro-Palestinian resistance is so wide. When October 7th happened, it is an example of just how illegible we and our existence and our bodies are to the entire Western neoliberal world order, period. And thinking about these conversations that people in academia are having being decades behind where Palestinian intellectual society was, right? These are conversations with the most quote-unquote literate people in the world, so to speak, that are so incredibly illiterate. And we've been wasting our time, quite frankly. We've been wasting our time with these conversations, you know? The anti-Zionism doesn't equal anti-Semitism conversation, decades, you know? Like, so many Palestinian writers, poets, organizers have burned themselves out having the most illiterate conversations with people like the Poetry Foundation just at our front door. People who are literally a wealthy little country club of, we're gonna like take our trust fund. And no, seriously though, I mean, these people, they can't even take themselves seriously. And what we're witnessing is a united, apathetic front of all the nonprofit industrial complex of the literary sphere saying no, you know? And I was talking to a really good friend, a local poet, Julian Randall, Afro-Dominican, queer, amazing, amazing writer, and he was saying, it baffles me why people think they can just corporatize and avoid speaking to Palestinians when literally they're afraid of Zionism. Y'all have been fighting this, again, as was said earlier, for decades, and so maybe people would think y'all know how to fight Zionism and would like defer to y'all. I don't know, but anyways, so I've been counter to all this. I've been editing an anthology with my sister Noura Hindi, where we've been spending nights up past 1 a.m. holding the poems of our community. We have this anthology. It's going to be titled "Heaven Looks Like Us." From the poet Fargo Tabaki, who was read in my bio, but the anthology features over 105 Palestinian poets around the world, many of whom are still living, and I want to kind of, as I transition into my own work, I want to put the words of my good friend Rasha Abdel Hadi into the world, again, of what are we doing to love Palestinians while we are still alive? Because some of these questions are not metaphors for us. Palestine, the metaphor, is Palestine, the metaphor, until the moment it isn't. And this is a poem that I'm going to read from my next book. And each of the sections of this long poem begin with an epigraph from someone without whom I couldn't have survived the past several months. When the Arab apocalypse comes to America, quote, and here I am, a woman alone at the threshold of the cold season, Farog Farahzad. Let us believe in the impermanence of countries. Let us believe in the bulldozing of walls. Let us invert the starlit vectors of a name. Let us unname, unarchive, unarchaeologize the origin. Let us sing the singularities of our being. Let us reflect not, singe rot, not err, and break plot. Let us believe in the miracles of the lyric, the flowers unspringtimed, the snowfalls unsilenced. Let us believe in the splitting of bread unbodied, the quenching of wine unblooded. Let us discover the beginning of language in the breakage of seasons. Let us believe in the living of fathers in winter, the returning of mothers in winter. Let us believe in our people who walked on impossible waters. Let us believe in the beginning of the cold season, yes, and let us believe in the hearth of an impossible fall. Let our belief in question, in case, in metaphor, return us in faith to the land. Return our songs to the land. Return our bodies to the land. Return our land to the land. Let this break our hearts unrafted. Let this save our arts uncrafted. Quote, and we burned the rules of syntax. We burned the chains of grammar and converted to the struggle. Rashid Hussein. Genocide remains, if anything, a kind of syntax. Causality is particle. Ontology is parsing. Expert is archaeology. President is transitive. Baby is object. Palestine is subject to. Murder is chiasmus. New York Times is illiteracy. Limbs are punctuation. Arms are comma. Bullet is maf'ul al-mutlaq. Hospital is conditional. Campus is tense. Stone thrown is maf'ul li-ajlah. Phosphorus is accusative. Night is iamb. Dawn is maf'ul fihi. God is contrapuntal. Crucifixion is clarity. Care is idafa. Eve is genitive. River is sea. Quote, I grant you refuge in knowing that the dust will clear, and they who fell in love and died together will one day laugh. Haba Abu Nada al-Irhamha. The sun can no longer look us in the eye, refuses the image of a shriveled corpse, of a corpse starved before it was dismembered, of a corpse tangled into a net, dropped into the sea, and called aid, of a corpse unimaginable beneath rubble, of a corpse that became rubble, of a hollowed out people, of a returning to the sea in thirst, in refusal. The sun became an image of everywhere. A red sun staining a bag of flour, a hemorrhage in the shape of a green sun, an abscess, a wound from the eye of a wound of a yellowed sun, a blue-beaten sun, a kingdom of jaundice. In the body's silence waits the sun of stop. I looked the sun in the eyes for 6 months, unwavering. Stop. In the opposite of nature I found a wilderness of stop. Is green the color of silence, or is green the color of a kind of apocalypse? Stop. I am become Gaza, said the sun, refusing still to look any of us in the eye. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Rafat al-Arir. Allah yarhamu. And on the day of the so-called ceasefire, when they kidnapped the Ghazan poet, where were you? Or had you already crowned him into martyr, you who only know how to love an artist by mummifying them? When the Arabs love our poets, we turn them into music. When the Arab apocalypse comes to America, its music will be one of phone calls across borders, wondering if this is how our ancestors felt the day they stole Kanafani from us. I cry every time I see this kite in the sky with Rafat's words, that poetry can become a study in better names than monument. How much of us has died in the assumption that greatness is the sun a poem arcs towards? A line ending can be a kind of illiteracy. If it can happen in language, it can happen in the body. If it can happen in myth, it was already a kind of history. We tell this to ourselves as we mourn a man we've only known through poems, screens, impossible, distance. That exile is just the state of loving the ones we haven't met, as we live the lives we could never live while grieving those very same lives. Have you finally stopped shooting yourself, Solmaz Sharif? I can't bear their springtime. It will be winter, all winter, and spring, and summer, and still we'll be waiting for another fall. My father died in autumn, and his death was so American it became a Palestinian death. It was winter all year after. Can we imagine 200,000 years of winter? The rubble of it. A year for every unknowable death beneath the avalanche. All of them, such Palestinian deaths, they became American deaths. On the opposite ends of oceans, we are not one in corpselessness. Empire wants us to think ourselves exceptional in grief. Whiteness wants us to think we are unmournable in mass. Is there a door on the other side of winter, or is every season just tunnel? This is the winter that became the winter that never ended. America deserves no redemption of sunshine, only a heat death from which we cannot wake. For all of our sakes, we'll stop this world, ya Gaza. We'll stop this world because the time for words is already behind us. Long live the Intifada, the sun said, of students carrying a list of slaughtered children the length of a whole nation who can bear this spring. The cameras stupefied into flowers, the sky heavy with inverted starlight. What happened to us in the dark happened to us in another imagination of light, of day, where the cop will crown himself soldier, the soldier will crown himself angel. This empire of backfired falsettos, we tire of heaven, the need of it, the liar in lyric. They shot a kid in the face today. Stop. The kid was American before he was stopped. They made a red to make a red. Stop. Blood in the water, water in the blood of words, of offices. It's spring, and all the colors have grown new meanings. A pink red, a red, a yellow who wants to be sunspot, a green, a Palestine ungreened of its reds. The sun was an op dressed in yellow, marshal of stop. I drank the sun and my body was all tunnel. Stop. Language of solar detention, the language of spray painting. Fuck the police is the only acceptable negotiation. Stop the poems. The poems have left our words and form instead a tent. Find us there where Palestine is everywhere. Here is another kind of beyonding, and there was red music and green, and the chants were songs and the words a kind of fire. Look, the poem is already beyond us. Look, isn't this new light stunning? Thank you.
Thank you, George. That was so powerful, so moving. Our next speaker will be equally powerful and moving is Noura Erakat. Noura is a human rights attorney and professor of Africana Studies and the program of criminal justice at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She's the author of Justice for Some, Law on the Question of Palestine. She is co-founding editor of Jadaliyya and an editorial board member of the Journal of Palestine Studies. Noura has also produced video documentaries including Gaza in Context and Black Palestine Solidarity. Noura.
I'm collecting keffiyehs to stay warm. But also thank you for the heads up. Next July, I will bring a sweater. So thank you for that. It's day 329. The situation on the ground in Gaza has only gotten worse. 250,000 Palestinians will likely die due to starvation, famine, and disease to come. In the words of Lara Al-Burno, every day is the worst day and worse than what we've already witnessed. Systematic sexual assault of Palestinian detainees, burning refugees alive in plastic tents that asphyxiated them before their skin melted off. Polio outbreak after 25 5 years, a preventable disease, and now an all-out incursion into the West Bank in what Palestinians have repeatedly warned is an ethnic cleansing project from the river to the sea. This horror is amplified by the fact that it follows 3 ICJ decisions, an ICC request for arrest warrants for Israel's head of state and defense minister, after we thoroughly debunked the most racist, vile lies about atrocities that never happened. That were repeated last night. Even after Israelis bellow the quiet part out loud, this colonial genocide continues with increasing cruelty and an unceasing supply of weapons that you and I pay for. There are no words left, and certainly less of a need for experts, because this is pretty simple. So I humbly offer 5 lessons that the genocide in Gaza has taught us. So far, and obviously just 5 of the many. First, it has exposed the enduring colonial nature of international law and legal institutions. For nearly 11 months, we have been witnessing a colonial genocide with an emphasis on colonial, and the inability of international law and legal institutions to stop it. That failure reflects the nature of the Genocide Convention itself, which is legislated in 1948, not because it's the first genocide to take place, but because it's the first to take place within Europe's shores. The exclusion of indigenous, African, and Asian peoples from the scope of harm reflects the developments of the laws of war as a European project that deliberately relegated the non-European explicitly as a savage other who was denied, excluded from, evacuated from the category of civilian. The final draft of the Genocide Convention removed colonial violence from its scope and represented a Eurocentric humanity. The inability to stem genocide today illuminates that there is no international law, but instead a law for the European world and a law for everyone else. This is why this battle is what Palestinian scholar Nimr Sultani has described as, quote, an epic legal battle of the global south versus the global north. Note how, with few notable exceptions, states of the global south have intervened at the ICJ to support the Republic of South Africa's petition, while states of the global north have intervened to support Israel's intervention. Note also how Namibia's late president told Germany when it tried to speak that it had no authority to tell anyone what is and what is not a genocide. And though international law has failed to stop this, the international rulings have catalyzed weapons and diplomatic sanctions. Most significant of the accomplishments, if there are any to recount, is that it enabled us to move from discussing the legality of Israel's operations to describe it as wholesale illegitimate. This war is not designed to extract captives or to destroy Hamas, but to depopulate Gaza and to continue the Nakba. And the return of the Nakba to understand Israel's conduct from the 1948 to the present reflects the success of Palestinians who have redeployed and refashioned international law in the service of emancipatory struggle, even as we face the most extreme expression of Zionist eliminationist policy in generations. Number 2, this is a U.S. genocide against Palestinians. In the first 6 days, the Biden administration sent 6,000 bombs. This week, it sent 50,000 tons of weapon, to date causing the equivalent of over 3 atomic bombs dropped on a besieged population, denied safe quarter and any means necessary for survival. The U.S. has matched this death-making with the provision of immunity at the UN Security Council, as well as directly sabotaging the ceasefire negotiations. Significantly, the Biden administration is doing this in contravention of its own laws and in contravention of the popular will of its constituents in this so-called democracy. Worse, it's going even further than manufacturing consent to squash dissent. One example alone, time is too little to recount all of them, is a bipartisan vote of 269 to 144 that the House passed to prohibit the State Department from citing the Gaza Ministry of Health statistics on Palestinian casualties. They can tell us with ease how many Hamas militants they have killed, but they can't tell us how many Palestinians have been slaughtered. Despite the U.S.'s role in this genocide, broad swaths of Americans insist that there is a difference between what happens over there and what happens over here. Let us be reminded of a direct continuum in the words of Martinican artist and essayist Amos Césaire, described as the boomerang effect. What is deployed in colonial geographies manifests within its metropole. And this is most apparent today in U.S. policing and the squashing of dissent. Sociologist Julian Go traces the militarization of U.S. law enforcement not to the Vietnam War, as many have done, but rather to the moment that the U.S. became an imperial power beyond these shores where it was already an imperial power, when it defeated the Spanish in the Spanish-American War in 1898 and became that power over Cuba, over the Dominican Republic, over Guam, Puerto Rico, Haiti, and Nicaragua. This is what catalyzed the transformation of the U.S. law enforcement into a form of state violence that reflected an imperial war machine, not to protect a people, but to hold on to colonial holdings. Today, we see this effect in the deployment of anti-terrorism laws to squash dissent and protesters in Cop City, in the censorship of books and the need to sign permission slips to read authors in the state of Florida, in the authorization of police to brutalize students on their campuses. It may be easy to these broad swaths of American to describe Palestinians as the sacrificial lamb necessary to advance a progressive agenda. But that would be a total misread. We are the canaries in the coal mine and the front line of what is coming for everyone. Letting us die is not making any of you safer. Number 3, Universities are an extension of the state's coercive apparatus. We have witnessed universities being the greatest source of harm to students and faculty. Among them is our beloved Professor Stephen Tamari, who I did not know would be here this evening, who is the beloved husband of our beloved leader, Sandra Tamari, who I did think would be here. In April, on his campus in Washington University, Professor Tamari was punched, body slammed, kicked, and dragged for standing around with his students. Shame. The police broke several of his ribs and his hand, and upon arrival to the hospital, the doctor told him he was lucky to be alive. We are so happy you are alive. Bless you. Abundant health to you. What has become clear is that rather than being the site of knowledge production and dissent, the university is an extension of this coercive apparatus. Yep. There's many explanations for this. I want to share just one, which is about public funding. Universities have been subject to the worst austerity measures and has made up for this windfall through donations from corporations, most notably weapons manufacturers, which have been receiving more public subsidies than the entirety of the Department of Education. In fact, one company alone in 2020, Lockheed Martin, just one of the 5 that have received these subsidies in a surge after 9/11, received more than the entirety of the DOE. These very companies are keeping universities afloat. At Johns Hopkins, for example, the university received twice as much money from defense contractors over the last 10 years than it's received from tuition. Obviously, they don't care about their students. They are not as profitable. Today, the Pentagon fuels 1/4 of university revenues. The university functions in concert with the military-industrial complex and depends on this alliance. Number 4, Zionism has no moral legs to stand on. Many of you are like, wait a minute, that's a lesson? Yes. Yes, for many it is. Though we have failed to stop a genocide, we have made plain the moral bankruptcy of Zionism, though really, Israel and Israeli society should take the credit for that. Its state and society have told us that for them to feel safe, they must depopulate the Gaza Strip to finish the job. Israeli society is publicly calling for more rape, for more killing. They are mocking Palestinians who are starving and being shredded into pieces. Its soldiers are flexing on killing babies, blowing up mosques as wedding announcements, and wearing the lingerie of women as an expression of their masculinity. American Zionist settlers are leaving Hyde Park and Park Slope to settle Palestinians' land and then demand that Palestinians be killed because of how dangerous it is, while lamenting that colonialism gets a bad rap. End quote. Zionism has historically had significant moral sway amongst Americans, including folks that we deeply admire with their contradictions, like W.E.B. Du Bois, who saw in Zionism a model for liberation of oppressed people. Today, folks, however, are not lining up to defend Zionism. To the contrary, most of them are quiet because they're afraid of punishment, because they're afraid of being attacked, because they're afraid of being doxxed, because they're afraid of harassment, because they're afraid of losing their gainful employment. Zionism is so weak today that it can only be maintained through coercive force and the threat of its use. AIPAC, which used to operate quietly, has to loudly wield its punitive stick. It has poured no less than $100 million into the US election cycle. Notably, it spent $8.4 million to unseat Cori Bush, and in that campaign took credit by saying that pro-Israel is good policy and good politics for both parties. But AIPAC, in all of its ads, did not mention Israel once. There was nothing to gain from that line of attack. Their aggressiveness is an indication of their weakness. Number 5, finally. On racism and power, the invisibility and the power of Palestinians. Racism is doing tremendous work in this moment to prime audiences for mass slaughter of Palestinians and to invisibilize our power at the same time. In line with Islamophobic and historic anti-Semitic tropes, classic tropes, I should say, Palestinians have been racialized as outsiders who cannot integrate into Western society, but are instead planning to impose creeping Sharia. They are outside of modernity. They are too religious and intrinsically violent. They are a threat to others and even to themselves because of colonial stereotypes about brown men being dangerous to their own women. It is this racial framing which also makes Palestinians appear as a redundant population that can be expended. So dehumanizing is this discourse that outrage for Israel's targeting of civilians did not happen until April, when Israel targeted 7 humanitarian aid workers with the World Food Cafe the first time. The attack finally prompted the Wall Street Journal editorial board to question Israel's war, noting that, quote, it had achieved neither of its war goals of returning all the hostages and successfully routing Hamas from Gaza, continuing that despite tactical gains, a strategic victory was far off. Our 35,000 dead at that point in April were not enough to compel that conclusion. Neither were the 4 premature babies who rotted in the NICU. Neither was the voice of Hind Rajab pleading for someone to save her, nor was the image of what was left of Sidra Hassuna's body hanging from the beam of what remained of her home and her body enough. The horrors from Al-Shifa were not enough, not the 300 dead, not the decaying bodies being feasted upon by ravaged dogs and cats, not the corpses whose arms were zip-tied and featuring bullet wounds of execution, not the gutting of the largest hospital in the north. Our lives were not enough.
Shame.
We did not even qualify for a presumption of innocence. And just as we were rendered into nothingness, our power is also being outright denied. As Ziadah of the Palestinian Feminist Collective has pointed out, it was Palestinians and an anti-genocide movement that made clear that Biden was unfit to run for office. And yet our role was not acknowledged. Now the entirety of this election could be swung by the anti-genocide movement, so much so that the Democratic Party, in another bid of gaslighting and deflecting of their responsibility, has described our calls to end the slaughter of babies as being pro-Trump. It was our power. It was our power that catalyzed the South African petition at the ICJ. It was our power that catalyzed, finally, for the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC to request arrest warrants. It was our power that catalyzed the split between the global north and the global south and illuminated the colonial nature of the world. It was the power of our people that mobilized Palestine Action to shut down 3 Elbit firms in the UK and the first one in Cambridge. In the words of Rafeef Ziadah, who could not be with us tonight, Palestinians have taught the world life. They continue to teach the world life, like the 6 prisoners who used spoons to dig themselves out from one of the highest security prisons in the world. They teach life, like Dr. Amira Assouli, who braved sniper fire to collect the body of a patient, of a fallen patient. Like citizen journalists Bisan Ode and Hind Khudari, who continue to report from the ground. They continue to report from the ground knowing full well that their press vests are targets for execution. It is our people. It is our people who are still standing today, despite 11 months of ruthless bombardment by the only nuclear power in the Middle East, backed by the largest power in the world, together with arms from Germany, the UK, and Italy. We continue to stand. It is our front line in diaspora, organizing across the globe, the front line of Palestinian women who are predominantly, I should say, hijabi, and that matters, who are the epitome of feminism and power in this moment, defying expectations and setting new standards of what is feminism and what is power. We are power. We are life. And we are victorious. Thank you for being here and for committing to that work, not only with the words that we share, but with the energy that we invest and with the trust that we have in one another, enough to organize, not just to be fierce and brave, but to be incredibly, incredibly smart. Thank you.
This panel just keeps getting better and better.
Ya Allah.
Our final speaker is Linda Sarsour, speaking of incredible Palestinian hijabis. Linda Sarsour is a Brooklyn-born Palestinian Muslim American community organizer and mother of 3. She's the former executive director of the Arab American Association of New York and co-founder of the first Muslim online organizing platform, Empower Change, as well as Until Freedom, a national racial justice organization working with Black and Brown communities across the country. Linda.
Thank you, Sumaya. Assalamu alaikum. May peace and blessings be upon you all. I am deeply honored and humbled to be on the stage here today. I was here also last week, and I decided to come back to Chicago to cleanse myself of the dehumanization that Palestinian Americans experienced just a few days ago. There's not much more that I can say, and I've been having a hard time over the last almost 11 months now finding words. What words do we have left for the last 11 months of destruction, of chaos, of bloodshed, of horror, of grief? So I want to say to those and my colleagues here up on the stage, in particular my Palestinian American comrades, and those that I recognize here in this audience today, that I have an ode to you. And I want to tell all our friends in this room, with all humility, that I am in awe of Palestinian American organizers and activists who get up every day. Not just our parents who grieve over watching television or people who just watch the videos and watch the children blown up to pieces, but those of us who get up every day amidst our grief, in the midst of our own trauma, and we organize for our people. We could decide to stay home and lay in our beds, but we get up just like our people in Gaza get up, just like our people in the West Bank get up, just like Palestinian refugees all over the diaspora get up. So to the Palestinians here, I see you, and I love you, and I pray for you, because our people count on us. We are the hope that our Palestinians have in Palestine. And it is why I am devastated every single day as a Palestinian American that we have not been able to stop the genocide against the Palestinian people. There were many moments that I wanted to give up. And for those of you that don't know much about Muslims, I'm going to tell you something that has devastated me the most about all that we have witnessed in Gaza. We as Muslims have great responsibility to the dead. And so there's no, we couldn't find the body, they'll just figure it out, we just cry. We have to, we have a religious obligation to bury our dead with dignity. So what is happening in Gaza now? Your family member was blown up in a massacre, burned in a tent. And so you come to the place and they ask you, was it a man or a child? How tall were they? How much did they weigh? 30 kilograms, 20 kilograms, 40 kilograms? And then they go fetch a plastic bag and they fill it up to the weight of what you described, and they walk away to fulfill their religious obligation to bury their dead loved ones. This is what we are experiencing today. I just want to make a few things clear. We are not a movement asking for a speaking slot at the Democratic National Convention. Just make sure that this is clear to everybody here. The Palestinian people are a people of great dignity and pride. There was a reasonable request that was made, and exactly what we thought would happen happened. Just to make sure that it was clear. And the conversation that's happening about Palestinians without the Palestinians and our Arab American and Muslim voters is we're expected to play point guard in an election that when the championship happens, we don't get a ring. We are supposed to be part of an all that does not include us. We are more worthy than that, my friends. We owe our people a lot more than that. And you owe us, too. In this moment, this is not, it happened a month ago. We're commemorating a year because it's been past a year. We are living a real-time genocide right now, paid for by US taxpayer dollars. Let's not even go that far. It's paid for by you and you and you and you and you and me. I, a Palestinian American, pay for the death and destruction of my own people. And I live with that every single day. We got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. And there were moments where I was giving up. I said to myself many moments, I said, why would I want to live in a world like this? What's my purpose of living in this world right now? What makes me more honorable than the Palestinians of Gaza? Why was it that I, as a Palestinian American, that my parents got the opportunity to flee a military occupation so that I could be born here in the United States? And what makes me more honorable than the people of Gaza? And I think about that often as a daughter of Palestinian immigrants. And so you better believe that every day when I wake up, when Sumaya wakes up, when Noura wakes up, when George wakes up, when Abdel, we get up to honor the sacrifices of our parents who left their home in Palestine so that I could be born in these United States of America. So you better believe we're going to make our parents' journey worth it to this country. I'm making my parents' journey worth it to this country. And so in those moments when I want to give up, our families in Gaza haven't given up. They still believe in freedom. They still believe in liberation. They still believe in a free Palestine. And then I saw young people across this country. Just when it was getting dark and bleak, the young people rose up. They said, Harvard University? You could take that degree. XYZ law firm? Take that job offer back. This, my friends, is the kind of courage and bravery that is required from all of us in this room. Someone recently wrote on social media, because I'm a part of this, so just to be clear, we're reflecting here together. Somebody said the revolution does not have a 501c3 status. And I think about that all the time. Because many of us who lead black and brown and marginalized people-led organizations are part of the nonprofit industrial complex. We just got to be honest with that. We can't act like we're not part of the problem. We perform and we compete for funding and we compete with sister organizations. We are willing sometimes to go forward even if that means others got to be left behind. Don't talk about all the external forces. We do a lot of good talking about that. We know what all the external forces are. The question is, what are we doing to be better? Because it is us that has to do better. I'm more disappointed sometimes in us than I am of those external forces who try to destroy our movements. Because if we had true, deep, genuine solidarity, one that allows us to sacrifice for one another, that allows us to give up for others, even if that means we lose a little, we couldn't be infiltrated. We couldn't be fractured. We couldn't be divided. And we couldn't be running around hustling for the little crumbs that are out there so we could organize our work. Sometimes I start talking to people in this country about a strike. And I be online talking about we need a mass strike in this country, right? Workers all across the country. And then people in the movement, some people in the movement will look me in the eye and say, Linda, you're so privileged because that's your job. You're an organizer. What about the people who got children? What about the people who got to pay bills? What about the working class and the poor? And in my mind, I start laughing to myself. And I said, please tell me what revolution or what liberation movement in this world was led by the rich and privileged. It was always the working class, the most marginalized, the downtrodden that have been leaders of revolution and liberation all over the world. It is only in the American context that it is a privilege to say that we should have a mass strike to end genocide. People have had revolutions for far less than a genocide. Sometimes I wonder, is it just the American people? Because I am a very privileged person. And I've had the pleasure and honor and privilege to travel around the world. And I don't mean this to all of you in this room because many of you are friends of mine and organizers, but in general, when it comes to fighting for justice, the American people are the laziest people on earth when it comes to fighting for justice. Roll back affirmative action, overturned Roe versus Wade, horror at the border, literally ripped the children from their mother's arms, mass police killings. This year alone, I think there's only been 10 days this year in 2024 where there was not a police killing in America. For God's sake, Sonia Massey was shot in the face probably 30 miles from here. And not one person on that DNC stage said a thing, and they put an armed cop on the stage to tell us that crime is down and funding for cops is up. I mean, my friends, all the work that we have done, some of us for over 2 decades, some of you in this room probably for 4 and 5 decades, we have found ourselves in a place where we're moving more to the right than I've at least seen in my lifetime. We are the first generation in American history that has to tell our daughters and children that they have less rights than we had and our mothers had in this country. What does that say about our generation? What does that say? Even from the days of the foundings of these United States of America, where we know it was on the extermination of indigenous people and on the enslavement of black people, but every single generation there was like a little progress. Our ancestors died, shed blood on this earth for us, so we could have the basic privileges and rights that we have today. What are we going to say that we sacrificed? What are you going to do and look your daughter in the eye, granddaughter, and what are you going to say that you did? What did you sacrifice? For me, when I get up in the morning, yes, I'm horrified by genocide, but even before a genocide, I wake up disappointed. I wake up disappointed. But the least that we can all do in this room, as someone said before, is I'm going to be able to say I did everything that I could. If I have something that somebody wants, take it. That I did what I could, I said what I could say, and I was not afraid, and I was not intimidated. Sometimes people will send me an article, and they say, Linda, I don't know if you saw this, but there's this article. And I said, before you read that, I read about 25 other ones. Imagine caring with those who oppose my values, that oppose what I stand for, care about me or what they have to say about me. Who are we afraid of? What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of the opposition defining who you are? In fact, if the opposition is not talking badly about me, I'm doing something wrong. I'm like fired up the next day. I'm like, I gotta do something. I'm just gonna wrap up with this. The people of Gaza, our people of Gaza, they have given us everything. Everything. Their children. I don't post those videos anymore. Ain't no more dead babies that are going to move anyone if you are not already moved. They've shown us great dignity and resilience. They showed us true sisterhood and brotherhood amidst the horror. Babies cry for their mothers in hospitals, not knowing that their mothers have been martyred. And another woman naturally picks up the child as her own. Sometimes children are crying over what you believe to be their mothers, but in fact those women are their caretakers, because their mothers may have already been martyred at another time. I am asking all of us to leave here, to leave this conference more focused and more steadfast. And do not allow anybody to tell you that our liberation is somehow in the context of an electoral cycle. That your path to liberation is somehow confined to a ballot box. Trust me, I'm an electoral organizer myself. So I don't need nobody to lecture me about electoral politics. I'm still going to the polls because I got school board members and state legislators who have been trying to suppress you and pass some of the most horrific pieces of legislation, yes, under a Democratic administration. This is not always about the top of the ticket. All politics is local. So don't be mad enough that you don't go to the polls at all, knowing that those in local politics are what have real impact on your public education funding, hospitals and mental health services, police reform and police accountability. That's where the real power lies. So you better believe that you're going to see me knock them doors. But I will always knock doors with principles and with my values and with those that I love, those that I organize, centered in the ways in which I show up in this movement. But I'm letting you know that this, my friends, is a marathon. And we've been here a long time. Our parents have been here for a long time. The question is, are you going to be here for a long time? And as our indigenous elders have taught us, 7 generations to come. And I used to believe that I would not be here to witness a free Palestine. And I used to tell myself that I'm going to plant whatever seeds that I have. So one day, generations from now, Palestinian children would live in joy in a free Palestine. And then I watched Gaza and the resilience of the people of Gaza and the people of the West Bank, watched the solidarity movements of the United States of America and across the world. And my parents said to me, Linda, I never felt Palestine, a free Palestine, this close before. And if my parents, survivors of Nakba and Naksa, could feel closer to a free Palestine, then we are going to see it within our lifetime. Stay bold, stay courageous, stay focused, stay in community. Do not be divided in this moment, because there are little babies in Gaza right now who are counting on you. And I tell people all the time, the vision that I give myself to get up out of that bed every morning is that one day I will be on the beaches of Gaza under a beautiful clear blue sky, and the only 2 sounds that I will hear are the waves hitting the shore and the sound of the laughter of the children of Gaza. And you will all be welcomed there. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Linda. A final applause for all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you throughout the conference.
Thank you. It's like great to be here with
Free
you.
Palestine!
You're on my syllabus for the, I teach at Amherst College. I'm teaching a Palestinian resistance literature course in the spring, so many of y'all on the stage are on the syllabus. Yes, no, please.
يعطيك العافية دكتور.
انت العافية بدات. I hope we can يعطي وقنعني يعني.
Keep your seat.
I'll be back.
من دنفر اللي فيه هيك زي
جامعة.
جامعة.
It's such an honor.